righty. I think you're coming in good. How you doing, Tom?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. How can I assist you, buddy?
Well, I had two things. One, I did want to ask first. So I was watching you on Tim yesterday. Well done. It was
Thanks, man.
thoroughly enjoyable. I wanted to ask. So I've had a lot of the same debates about the fake elector scheme from Donald Trump, and one of the things that comes up fairly often is what Tim brought up, which is the election in Hawaii and the election in Florida. Normally, the thing that I pretty quickly bring up is the fact that those two elections, they had the state legislatures choose, the parties within the state legislatures chose those electors, but you didn't bring that up. Is there a difference that I'm maybe missing there that makes my answer incorrect?
So let me start from the beginning there, because it's a good question. So first off, the reason I didn't bring anything up on that issue is just because I chose not to. I didn't want to get bogged down in the details of that comparison. So that was just a decision of me not to get bogged down in that actual. So you shouldn't read into my lack of addressing it as me conceding it. That comparison is completely legitimate. And I'll start first by saying the following thing. I don't concede that it's legal what happened in 1960. I don't have to concede that that's legal what occurred. It could be completely illegal what happened in Hawaii. And I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying it could be. And it would still not be as bad as Jan 6. And it could still even be criminal. I'd never, ever in these discussions concede that what happened in 1960 was okay. It would be like saying, oh, well, because no one ever charged a rape in the past or a murder in the past, we can never charge those crimes ever again. So that's number one. I'd never concede that that was legal what they did. Two, I would say your question was about that it had the air of legislative approval, right?
Right, because that seems to be the process that they have to go through in order to pick their candidates. And so the while you're correct that you don't have to concede that it's legal, it's still a difference that makes it drastically worse what Trump did, right?
Yeah, I think that is a attendant circumstance that when I say that, I mean it's a side matter to me that isn't as important, because the truth is, right, only one of those slates of electors was signed by the governor and sent, right? So only one was the quote unquote authentic, regardless of whether the legislature approved a second. There was only, I think this is true, only one that was in fact the duly authorized slate, and one that purported to be but hadn't gone through all the steps. So even though I agree with you, the fact that there was a government body that had pushed, I think, both slates of electors.
I don't know if that's true.
What they purported to be.
So Tim brought up Hawaii. I don't know if that's true for Hawaii.
Yeah.
I know that is true for Florida. Is that they had the second election or the redo count or whatever it was that they did with, I think it was Gore and Bush. They redid their counts, and then once they had a conclusion, they sent those electors off. So I know that's definitely true in the case with Florida. I don't know if that's true with Hawaii.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of neither. It's window dressing. It's a cherry on top. If you can point to, well, listen, this was in Trump's case, no one signed off on the fake slates of electors from any government office. Here you had at least some kind of legislative support for it. But to me, it's not the hill I'm going to die on. The fundamental hill that I'm going to die on is that the people who promoted the elector situation in the Hawaii case didn't think that they lost that election. Right? The essence of what fraud is you are lying materially to induce some benefit in a way that is against equity. It's malicious, in other words. And so if you are representing something that you don't believe to be the case, then and it's all premised on this notion that you actually won the election, that you lost. Here I'm talking about the leaders of that conspiracy. Then I think that's a material difference. And the circumstantial evidence that exists for why it might be good faith for the kind of preservation argument in one case versus the other is in the Hawaii case, right? You actually, one, have a very close election. Two, you don't have circulating claims and statements that profess voter fraud when none existed. You don't have the contemporaneous evidence of Trump's that he lost, right? That he knows he lost. That everything he said has been debunked. So really, they're completely different cases. I think principally on the malice of the individuals. Now, you could go around that and say, well, it's not that they're lying about winning or losing the election. They're lying that these are in fact the actually duly appointed certified electoral slate. And so regardless of whether they think that the election was one way or the other, they know that these aren't the lawfully elected, duly elected slate. That's why I say I don't concede that what occurred was legal. I don't concede that what occurred was legal. Now, it could be under the then existing law of Hawaii. I haven't done a deep dive research into the Hawaiian law. And I think that you could make a good argument in terms of criminal intent that it's not present there. But needless to say, I think we have completely different cases on just the base facts of the underlying malice. And that's sufficient to distinguish it in addition to everything that you're talking about.
Well, correct. And I think that's like the difference that is within the distinction is that we're like with Hawaii and Florida, I believe it was the parties within the state legislature that still chose their electors, and that is the legal process that is set up for them to choose the electors. Whereas in the case with Trump, I believe they asked the states to choose the electors. They didn't. We even have emails from Eastman talking about the fact that they're not going to do it, so we need to move forward and just go choose the electors. So then Trump's team just chooses electors.
Yeah, just be careful with that, Tom. Be careful. Because when you said the parties within the legislatures, I mean, what is that? That just sounds like it's party people. And if it's just party people, then that's not any government signing off on it. Or you're like,
well, from my understanding, that is how it works. Is that so like, let's say Georgia. Okay, so Georgia wins. Let's say Biden wins in 2020 in Georgia, and Trump loses. So the Democrats within the legislature are the ones who choose their electors. Whereas if Trump had won, it would have been the Republicans within the legislature who choose their electors.
Yeah, that's all done beforehand. That's all done beforehand. Yeah. That's done before the election. The election is not a real direct election for Trump. It's an election for pre-selected electors that have already been selected before the election.
So then, if that's the case, then did they just go and get the electors that the Republicans had chosen, or did they choose their own people to be
Who's they?
elected?
You're talking about Trump?
I'm talking about Trump's team.
So Trump sometimes got the actual electors that his party had chosen. Sometimes he filled in with people who were not even the people who were on the ballots. They're not on the ballots, but they're the people who have actually been promoted to be the electors before the election. So there are a couple problems, right? So one is none of them won, the disputed ones. And number two is some of the electors weren't even the Republican chosen electors.
I didn't know that. So, because I didn't know that they were choosing them beforehand. Considering the fact that we normally vote at the beginning of November, but then they don't actually turn those votes in to the state capitals until like December 20th.
Yeah, but remember,
I thought that they chose them after the election.
Remember, Tom, it's not a direct election. It's an election for the electors, right? So the Constitution says that the states are allowed to allocate their electoral votes however they choose, and the choosing of electors, right? And so the states have made these processes where it looks and feels like it's a vote for president, but it's a vote for electors. And so in order to vote for electors, right, those electors have to be selected before the election. Because you're not actually voting for the president. You're voting for the electors. So it's this is all done before the election.
Okay, I thought the electors were just the representative number. So like in Georgia, if it's 16, it is just the representative number of 16 electors that were voting, not specific.
That's how many electoral votes the state has.
Yeah.
The electors are actual physical people that exist. There are these weirdo people that are like party insiders. They're all kind of loyal to their candidates, right? That actually have to be picked and that actually are picked and designated as the electors before the election.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Yeah, I'll have to look into that a little bit more then, because I thought that was
look into the procedural, because I don't want you to get caught up where someone says, I don't want you to get caught up where someone's like, that's not how the process works, and then you kind of like, it's a little complicated. What I would focus on in the Hawaii comparison is never, ever just accept because no one was charged in Hawaii or because there's no like court case interpreting Hawaii, that somehow what happened in Hawaii was legal. Never accept that.
Yeah,
And
sure.
then
It's not
two,
so much
you
about
distinguish.
Hawaii,
Yeah.
but it's like the reason that I bring it up is because like if electors are official officers and they are signing
They're not
something,
officers. Be careful with that language, right? So officers is a term of art as well. Electors are their own thing. They're an official like thing, but they're not officers. Just be careful with that language because it's constitutionally relevant. But yeah, sorry, I know what you're talking about. They're
well,
like
no, I thought they were
officially
officers
done
because they were
things.
elected. That somebody who was elected within like a
They
yeah,
don't
that's somebody,
hold office. It's a kind of weird kind of
or maybe it's official.
uh,
Maybe that's what it is. It's
they're
official and
they're
not
not even
officer.
officials, right? They're electors. They're people who are chosen to do one thing and one thing only. Really, is to vote for president. So
Okay.
they don't hold office, right? They don't hold any obligations or duties beyond voting, and that's why they're called electors.
Okay,
Don't
I
be
think I
confused
came to
also,
that
in some
conclusion
states-
because I thought
Yeah.
that it was one of the states, maybe Arizona, that had charged some of these people with impersonating an officer, and so I thought that that was like part of the title then,
I should be
because
clear.
I thought that some of them
I
got
should be clear.
charged with this.
So under federal interpretation of what officer means, they're not officer under federal interpretation of what it means. But states
Okay.
can have different definitions for what officers are.
Okay.
And so I guess it's possible that states could define their electors as officers. I shouldn't have been that broad. But also keep in mind that states can define the term electors to be different as well. So some states refer to their voters as electors, not to be confused with presidential electors. But in the sense of the constitutional role of electing the president, the electors are not considered officers under the United States or of the United States. At most, maybe under state law, they would be considered state officers, as you might
Okay.
have. Maybe that's why they were charged that way.
Okay.
That's up to the states.
Because that's to me,
But
it
these
was
are good
like
points.
actually breaking the process, and so that like what I think it was pretty clear if they're saying like, well, what exact law is it that he broke? I can say, well, obviously impersonating an officer and having them like choosing these electorates without going through the official process of the state parties choosing them. Those were like the major two laws that I think were always the easiest to point out, but that makes it a lot more complicated.
I would like stick to the federal. The federal is the federal charges are super easy, and this is the Jack Smith indictment, and he released a report on it that explains everything. That's a very nice one to follow. The state ones, the reason why these bad faith conservatives go for the state ones is because people don't know as much about them. They don't know as much about the state laws at issue in those cases, and they don't know as much about like the way the states kind of frame those cases. And so
Well,
it's
I'm from
easier for
Georgia.
people to
I go for the state
Yeah.
ones because I'm from Georgia. I'm very
Okay.
updated. I live right next to, I spend a lot of time in Fulton County. And so I know
Okay,
the
so then you
Fulton
should-
County case with the RICO case pretty well.
Perfect.
So that's why I normally focus on that one. And then I end
Yeah.
up getting into the distinctions within state cases. So
Yeah, you could also distinguish if you really want to be a prick and say, well, I don't know about Hawaiian law. That could be Hawaiian law. And so whatever Hawaii does, none of this arose under Georgia state law. And so I don't even need to consider what happened. If you're only focusing on state law and state charges, then why should what happened in Hawaii have any bearing on Georgia? Yeah, maybe it's not a crime in Hawaii. I don't know anything about that. I just know it's a crime in Georgia, and in Georgia it's a crime. That's a really easy way to distinguish it, which isn't, for the federal one, maybe it's a little bit more uncomfortable, but for the state one, you have why should Hawaii's precedent be binding on Georgia state law? There's just no reason it should.
yep. Yeah, I mean that is the process that I normally use is with like Andrew Wilson and Rob Norn. Normally I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Hawaii, like they have their own AGs, they have their own laws. I don't know what they're doing. But I know in Georgia
The
they
trick
were
about
very
them is-
clear that they were not going along with Trump's plan and he did it anyways. So
Yeah. The trick about Rob Norn, Andrew Wilson is that they have surface level ways to make anybody who's unprepared for any conversation uncomfortable. But if you dig past that, and if you know those tricks, and they are tricks, they don't read these reports. They don't really read these indictments. They don't know what actually went on, and they don't actually read. They don't read, really. They just engage in enough of these debates that they notice the patterns. But
Rob's really good at
once
looking for some sort of
he'll cherry pick quotes from the sources. He'll cherry
Yes,
pick things from the IG reports.
yes,
But
he's good at looking for some sort of like hypocrisy. Whereas Andrew Wilson, he's not.
yeah,
He hasn't read any of those things. He's going to find some semantic thing and then drill down on that semantic difference to try to
yeah.
make it look like you don't know what the word means. And so, yeah.
One thing that's really helpful is there are a bunch of debates, atheist debates that happen between atheists and the term is presuppositional thinkers.
I used to do
presuppositional
presuppositionalism. Yeah,
yeah.
I used to be a
Did you?
Christian debater for a long time, so I did apologetics.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So watch come in it with a new framework and watch those debates and look at those sometimes, and you really get a sense of what the Andrew Wilson tactics are. And once you do, and once you realize what he's doing, and that it's pure sophistry, you can take a step back, and it just unlocks the third eye, third chakra. And Andrew Wilson doesn't debate me. He said that in order for him to debate me, I would need to pay him thousands and thousands of dollars. He said that multiple times, and it's been consistent throughout the years. Yeah, now, even recently, I have to pay him. He says I have to pay. It can't be someone else. Me, I have to pay him thousands of dollars. Otherwise, he won't debate me. So, it really is. He chooses his fights wisely on people he thinks he can bully around. That's why he does the whatever podcast. He's an embarrassing lol cow. And Rob isn't like that, because Rob is willing to engage with I think most people, and I think Rob actually does more reading than Andrew Wilson does.
Yeah, Rob's definitely a lot more well-researched. I've debated Andrew Wilson for years. Him and I, like, before he even was on The Crucible, him and I were debating on, like, politically provoked and crap like that. So I know him pretty well. Was there something else that you wanted to say on this before I asked the other question?
No. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You have another question. Go for it.
So the Mohamoud Khalil thing, the part that I have trouble with on this is where we're drawing a lot of these lines. So I saw counterpoints. I got into it with him a little bit on Twitter about what support is. And that's kind of the part that I have a little bit of issues with, is I'm not sure that I would apply freedom of speech the same way to a person with a green card as I would to a citizen. But you seem to feel like they are the same across the board. Is that correct?
I don't claim that they're exactly the same. I don't claim that. I think that there are probably some differences in terms of the scope of the right, but not what these people are talking about, where it eviscerates the right, anything that's related to the right. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that first. But first, let's talk about an equivocation. There's an equivocation right now between support, in the layman's definition of support, that is voicing support, voicing someone's preference and approval for something. And there's a line of doctrine that deals with material support. Okay.
Right.
So keep that separate in your head. There's a line of doctrine that says that there's an exception to the First Amendment if you provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization. Okay. But that applies whether or not you're a green card holder or a citizen.
That applies to everybody. Yeah.
If you provide material support for a foreign terrorist organization, that could be like a law firm giving advice to a foreign terrorist organization, then that can be a crime. They can throw you in jail for that, even if you're a citizen. And so what people will do is they'll piggyback the doctrine on material support and conflate that, equivocate when they say the term support, and they'll try to use all of the doctrine related to material support when it's completely different. What material support means is to provide some kind of consequential benefit in coordination with a terrorist organization. It requires
like you're
not
raising funds
independent
for them would
advocacy.
be like a really good example. Like raising funds and
like
sending
communication
it to
with
them.
them, right? Like there's a point of contact between you and the organization where you are actually like either communicating or collaborating with them intentionally, and they're there's an intent for both of you to be in like talk with or like in connection with each other. There's a connection, in other words. It's not just independent advocacy. And so none of that is alleged as with Khalil. So none of what Khalil and he hasn't been alleged by the government to give material support. There are specific bases of inadmissibility and deportability, which would apply for someone who gives material support to a terrorist organization. But they have not alleged that of him.
Isn't that implied just by them saying they're deporting him for support of a terrorist organization? Wouldn't it have to be some sort of material support?
They're being tricky. The answer is no. They're saying we're going to be against people who support that organization, but they're using the layman's definition of support
Right.
to mean voice opinion, right?
So they can just
When
say,
you
I
ask
really
Ilya-
like the way that Hamas dresses.
Yes.
They have supported
Right.
Hamas now.
Yeah, right. And just to be clear, there's no evidence that that I've seen that Mohamoud Khalil even supports in that context, right? That even supports in the layman's version of it, right? Like, where's the evidence of him saying I like Hamas, right? But that's what they are intending to say is that I even think at some point they said he's aligned with Hamas.
Right.
That he's even not like saying that he said something in support of Hamas. That's almost saying like, well, if you support Palestine, you're aligned with Hamas. That's ridiculous. Even Tim said on our show, that's ridiculous. But yeah, no, they're being tricky as well, the administration, because they're saying support, but they're not alleging that he's removable on the basis of material support. They're alleging he's removable on some other basis. And so it's a complete red herring when an idiot, I have to say Connor is an idiot. He's very dumb. Connor Points is very stupid, just to be clear. When Connor Points says something like, oh, he's removable and he's citing a provision based on material support or endorsement, one, there's no evidence that Mohamoud Khalil has done that, but also he's perhaps without knowing, incorporating a standard that doesn't apply to Khalil because it involves communication or collaboration under the doctrine announced in Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project, which is the case that is about material support. So that's not applicable because there's no allegations to that effect. The only thing we have is the pure independent advocacy of Mohamoud Khalil, which in some people's eyes constitutes advocacy for Hamas. I've not seen anything like that. I've not seen anything that shows that he has a avowed support for Hamas. But even if he did, that's core protected First Amendment speech. So in all these conversations, I, just for the purpose of having it, assume that he's just in support of Hamas and vocalizing it. We don't actually have facts to that effect, but I just assume it because I want to actually have the argument on principles. And the truth is, those facts aren't established, and even if he did, that's protected speech.
Okay, so I do want to get to that part. But I have
the green card holder versus citizen, right?
Well, first there's a do you know the Canary Mission people?
No.
They are a group of people who I believe have been like listing pro-Palestine advocates and talking about them as though any sort of protest that they're a part of is endangering all of the Israeli students at all of these campuses. And so they've like listed a lot of the people who are part of these protests, which is why a lot of them seem to cover up. And part of like my theory and the way that I've been talking about this is that he's said the entire time that he's not part of the what was the CUAD, and that he wasn't one of the leaders there, that he was just a spokesperson and a negotiator for them, and that makes total sense because all of them are trying to hide their identities and stay covered up, and so they need somebody who's able to just come out and speak on behalf of them. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is like speaking for them, but instead like relaying their wishes to people. But there are some things posted on here, and it says one of the things is he openly justified terrorism, speaking as a CUAD representative in a video posted on X. He stated, "We've tried armed resistance, which is legitimate under international law, but Israel calls it terrorism." And then in this video, they have other parts where the lady who's speaking next to him also says the end goal is to is the end of the Zionist project, full liberation of Palestine. These are things that I think is more explicit support of what the United States has deemed a terrorist organization. And when somebody has a green card and is giving what seems, this is like a very gray area of what I would call explicit support of a terrorist organization. And so this is more so what I'm wondering about right here is, would we want to allow into the country people who do give verbal explicit support for what is deemed by the government a terrorist organization, or who hand out propaganda on behalf of a terrorist organization, things like that? That seems like, in my head, it just seems intuitive that we probably wouldn't allow those sorts of things. So what is your thought on that?
Yeah. So the question you asked, I just want to have clarification on terms. You say, would we want to accept into the country, let these people into the country, right?
Right. More so
That
as
was your
like
question.
a legally, yes. Like about what I'm talking about, like for a green card.
Yeah, I would respectfully say that that's not the question. We've already let them into the country. They've been admitted. This guy has been filed an adjustment of status, and that adjustment of status has been approved. And so it's not a question of do we want to let these people in, right? The question is, do we want to deport these people? Fair?
Yes. Would we want to take away their green card?
Okay.
Yes.
Right. So that's number one, the framing. And the answer is, in my opinion, if the only means to kick them out is violating the First Amendment, my answer would be no. I don't want to kick them out if the only means of kicking them out is violating rights. So that's my answer to that question. And I think there are no ways at the moment to kick him out, or at the very minimum, the ways that they're going about kicking him out violates rights, right? And there's nothing inconsistent with me saying that advocating for violence in the abstract, which I don't necessarily think that that's what was being done in those quotes you read me. I think it's a little bit more attenuated than that. But I don't agree with those opinions. But I don't agree with a lot of opinions, right? I don't agree with KKK people. I don't agree with MAGA people.
Right.
And would it be better if MAGA people were kicked out of the country? I don't know. Like, that's a kind of difficult question.
Well, this is
But
why I
know
asked
that
you
at
at the
bare
beginning
minimum,
if you
yeah.
had like a distinction between the First Amendment rights that you would give to somebody who's here on a green card and First Amendment rights
Right.
that you would give to a citizen. And so that's why I'm asking about these, is because
If you're asking me what I would do, the answer is no. And the reason why is as follows. The Constitution does not refer to citizens as having First Amendment rights. It says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And so by the plain terms of the Constitution, there is no limitation on the First Amendment with respect to only citizens. It's been the well-established case law of the Supreme Court that resident aliens have First Amendment rights. So you ask me, well, okay, they have First Amendment rights, but do they have the same First Amendment rights? Whether they do or not isn't the question. We shouldn't be saying, should they have the exact same rights? That's not really the question. The question is, do their First Amendment rights extend as far as the opinion Hamas is good? And I would say, of course, their First Amendment rights extend as far as, or at least as far as them saying Hamas is good. Because wouldn't you say that it would be against their First Amendment rights, right, to say Obama is good and kick them out on that basis, right? Or to say Trump is good and kick them out on that basis, right? And if what you're saying is they do have First Amendment rights to say Trump is good, or to say Obama is good, or to say Israel's good, they just don't have it with respect to Hamas, what would be the principled basis to distinguish support for those various entities and individuals?
Well, that the thought that I was using is that if they're actually listed as a terrorist organization and they're
Yeah,
building
that's another
support.
government determination. What if Biden takes over and says, okay, we consider MAGA to be a domestic terrorist organization?
Well, normally we would also consider financial contributions to be a part of your political speech as well.
Okay,
But in the case of donating money to a terrorist organization, we would consider this material support.
yeah, but that right now you're adjusting the First Amendment. Sorry, you're talking about what the First Amendment means as with respect to everybody. You're not making a distinguishing factor based on, green card holder versus citizen. And what you're saying is you can draw a line between Hamas and people like Obama and Trump because Hamas has been designated as a foreign terrorist organization. But there is no case law that says independent advocacy for Hamas is banned, right?
Yeah.
You would agree, right? Like, Tom, you're allowed to say that you like Hamas.
Yeah, of course.
You feel that the First Amendment protects you if you were to say that. And so, yes, there is a distinction in the case law. There is a line around giving material support to Hamas, but not around Tom saying Hamas is good. That's protected speech. And so if it's protected speech for you, Tom, why should it be not protected for a green card holder?
Um, what about like, because okay, so anti-BDS laws I feel like are something similar where it's a lot of like about countries, or sorry, businesses that operate out of other countries that are operating within the United States that are going to boycott like Israel, right? Normally, any
Hmm.
other business that's founded in the United States, they can say and do whatever it is that they want. But if they're founded in another country, they come here. They're not allowed to boycott Israel because this is against our like the interests of the state. And so I'm thinking in the same lines with a green card holder, is that it wouldn't be in line with the state to have people coming in who are actually advocating on behalf of.
You said again, having people come in, that's not the right that you're claiming for the government to
Well,
do.
sure,
I think the
not
government
as they're
is probably
coming
within its
in.
right to.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
I don't mean like what I mean is that, so normally I think of like green card holders as people who are trying to move through the process to eventually gain some sort of citizenship, and
then that's wrong.
that this is
We need to
part
address
of the
that.
process.
Green card holders, green card holders by necessity have been admitted into the country already. They're in the country.
Hmm. Right, but
In
they don't
fact,
have
green
citizenship,
card
and most of the
holders.
time it seems like they're trying to gain
Okay, but
citizenship, but
they're
this is
in the
just part of
country.
the process for them.
Not all, not all, and they're in the country already.
Okay.
They're not at people who have green cards. There's no required or even statutory expectation that they convert to citizenship. Many don't want to,
Yeah, of course.
and so but they're still already admitted into the country. And in fact, that legal fiction is so strong for green card holders that when they leave the country and come back, except in very select circumstances, green card holders are not even considered subject to grounds of inadmissibility
Hmm.
because they're already considered admitted into the country. That is to say, the presumption is so strong that green card holders have already been admitted into the United States that they're not even subject to the bases of an inadmissibility determination when they're outside the country, right? When they leave the country and try to come back in. So if green card holders, if anyone is, they've already been admitted. And so when you were trying to assess the situation, you don't take it from like, do we want to let them in? The question is, do we want to push them out after they've
Right.
already been let in?
Yeah, take it away. Okay.
Yeah, and the answer is there's no like principled basis, I think, to say, well, Tom, he has a First Amendment right to say Hamas is good, but a green card holder doesn't, unless you're just willing to arbitrarily say we can pick and choose what part of the First Amendment on a non-neutral basis that would otherwise apply to a citizen with respect to a green card holder. And there's no principled way to distinguish it, right? You can say Hamas is good for the same reason you can say Trump is good. How do you distinguish Trump is good, right? Because you would agree, right? If the First Amendment means anything for a green card holder, if it means anything at all, surely it means for a green card holder to express a preference for who's going to be elected president. Fair?
Hmm.
Otherwise, what would a First Amendment mean for a green card holder, right?
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? Okay.
Yep.
And you agree green card holders do have some First Amendment rights.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, it wouldn't mean much for them to have any First Amendment rights if they're not able
Right.
to say that they have opinions that are obviously controversial. It would mean literally nothing
Right,
if all of
right.
a sudden the most
Exactly.
controversial opinions are not allowed.
And if you take Tim Pool's line, Tim Pool said they have First Amendment rights, but you can deport them for any reason. That's just that's so stupid, right? And the same thing with good logic. They have First Amendment rights, but they can be deported for anything they say. I mean, then what rights do they have, right? What does it mean for a First Amendment right for you to have the right to speak if you can be kicked out of the country for anything you say, no matter what?
But is that not a
That's
difference
just crazy.
between being able to lock them up for some sort of speech versus take away their green card for some type of speech?
No, because the First Amendment applies in non-criminal contexts, right? If someone were to say to you, "Hey, we're gonna deny you this zoning permit because, that's a little more difficult. I'm gonna deny you a liquor license because you're a Republican." That's not a criminal matter. You would agree, right?
Right.
But it would still be a First Amendment violation for the government to deny you a liquor license because you're a Republican. Agreed? Even though it's not criminal.
Yes, but this is from the government, right? Whereas like a business
You know,
could.
but a liquor license would be from the government, right?
Yeah. Okay.
a
I
license
got
from
you.
the
I
government.
got you. So,
And
so
I'll give
yeah.
you another.
So green card is from the government as well. So it would.
Right.
Okay. I got you.
I'll give you another example. All right. So because this is the kind of argument that GoodLawgic was trying to peddle. He was trying to say, well, immigration is just never a punishment, and so nothing with respect to immigration can ever violate the First Amendment. Right. That's the kind of argument that I'm hearing right now from some people. And it's part of what your argument sounds in is that, well, this is immigration. It's different than criminal punishment, and anything related to immigration just doesn't. It's not even a First Amendment issue, right? Would you say the same thing if the government said, we're going to take away your green card because you're a Muslim? If it's true that immigration is just not a punishment, it's not cognizable as a punishment under the First Amendment in any respect, then it would be just as true for the religion clauses as it is for the First Amendment with respect to speech. You understand that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if immigration itself, any exercise of immigration authority doesn't implicate the First Amendment, then it doesn't implicate it with respect to either the First Amendment with respect to speech or the First Amendment with respect to the free exercise of religion or the establishment of religion. Those are things that are also in the First Amendment. So how can it be, right, that the immigration power is just a category error when it comes to the First Amendment, but somehow the First Amendment would prevent exercise of the immigration authority with the religion clauses? You understand that? Because
Yes.
people's intuition is, well, no, the First Amendment would definitely protect you from being deported because you're a Jew, obviously. But how could that be if invocation of the immigration power doesn't invoke the First Amendment?
Yeah. Of course. Okay. So then we're
right. The First Amendment either applies this to exercise of the immigration power or it doesn't, unless you're going to make the untenable argument that only part of the First Amendment applies to invocation of the immigration power, but not the other part of the First Amendment. That just seems crazy.
okay. So where I'm asking, if you're saying that the First Amendment applies the same to a green card holder that it would to a regular citizen, you're saying that you're not saying that. Do you have like a difference that you would draw there?
There is at least one difference. There is some case law about whether or not certain green card holders are allowed to raise selective enforcement claims under the First Amendment in deportation matters. It's a little complicated, but there is on-point Supreme Court case law that says that immigrants, even green card holders, cannot raise selective enforcement claims. However, just to be clear, so that would be, I guess, an extension, a First Amendment right that is available to citizens that is not available to green card holders, specifically in deportation matters. But the reason why I would distinguish it is it's not First Amendment specific. It's raising any kind of selective enforcement claim with respect to constitutional issues, including race, right, including religion. So it isn't, to me, race is under the 14th and 5th Amendments of the Constitution, so that wouldn't be a First Amendment issue. And so even though I would say it's kind of a category of its own, it only applies in the deportation context, it's not specific to the First Amendment, I guess there's one example in which, in a deportation matter, a green card holder is not able to raise a First Amendment claim that you probably could raise in an equivalent context for citizens. But again, it's a really narrow.
When you say selective
limitation.
enforcement, you're talking about like some sort of discrimination, like from a I don't know, like a landowner or like a boss or something.
No, from
like
the
that?
government. So like, it's like this kind of context, right? So when I say selective enforcement, I mean the government is stopping short of saying that we're deporting you because of speech, but everyone kind of knows they're doing it because of speech. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it would be like them saying, we're deporting you because of this very clerical error, but in the background, you kind of have pretty good intel that they don't really care about the clerical error and they're just going after you because of the First Amendment and because of you said something bad about their boss, right? So it's a selective enforcement claim. They're disfavored in general, even for regular citizens. So it would be a policy that is by its terms neutral, or an enforcement that is by its terms neutral. So imagine it's easier to imagine in the racial context, right? They're not saying that we're charging you let's say in the criminal context, right? We're not charging you because you're black. They're charging you because you crossed the street, you jaywalked, but they never bring jaywalking charges against anybody. Okay.
Right.
And they're only bringing you have pretty good evidence that the guy is racist and he's only charging you because you're black, even though the complaint only says jaywalking. In their disfavored claims that you can under the Constitution raise issues of selective enforcement. And so all I'm telling you is there's some case law that suggests that certain selective enforcement claims that you bring in deportation proceedings specifically. So that's like when you're saying, hey, you're not deporting me because I'm inadmissible for violating this, subsection. You're deporting me because you don't like that I support Trump.
Right.
What the Supreme Court has said is you can't really raise those claims as a LPR specifically in deportation proceedings. But it's not on all fours because citizens, of course, are never subject to deportation proceedings. And so in what sense is it a limit? Like, in what sense do citizens have less? Do you get me? Like, a citizen never has to deal with the situation of deportation, really. And so the selective enforcement context in the deportation context, in the citizen context, doesn't really exist. And so it's a very narrow situation, but it's one where I could see that there's an argument that maybe it's less extensive than the First Amendment rights that a citizen has. But I would almost argue that it's not really grounded in First Amendment differences. It's kind of grounded in substantive rights to stay in the country differences, which is citizens have a substantive right to be in the country and green card holders don't.
Okay. Because, my initial thought is to obviously feel like this is a First Amendment violation, and that obviously I haven't seen any evidence that he's done anything violent, that he's like explicitly advocated for violence in a way that where he's like telling people to do something violent. But if he supports rhetorically or verbally supports violence from a terrorist organization, that's where, to me, it just starts to hit like a gray area to where I wasn't really sure about it, and so that's why it's a little bit more confusing.
I want you to think
me.
about it from the. I understand because it's really difficult and it's sometimes very complicated. First Amendment doctrine is complicated and at times it can be very tricky. But the way to ground it out is the following: is to think about, well, is this in the category of unprotected speech already, right? So if it's already unprotected speech, if it's material support for terrorism, then it can already be banned. So then we shouldn't have a problem deporting someone, a green card holder, for material support if we can throw citizens in jail for material support, right? Like, we all agree that at a bare minimum, green card holders don't have more First Amendment rights than citizens, right? So the first thing you should think about is, like, is what's being alleged already in a category of unprotected speech? And if it is, then we don't have to worry about it. But here, right, assume that it is support for Hamas. Mm-hmm. Well, citizens are allowed to. And so now you have to justify why you're treating citizens differently than green card holders in this context, right? Mm-hmm. And in this context, what would be the basis under which to distinguish why you would treat a green card holder different than a citizen? Now, I can give you another example of where there's a First Amendment difference. For admissions decisions, right?
Right.
You started this by saying, should we let these people into the country
before
at all?
they come in.
I will grant to you that under the existing case law, it seems that the government can, like, deny you entry for a lot of reasons, and including crazy reasons, right?
Right.
Like, they can deny you entry if you're a Chinese person. If there were a law that said Chinese people aren't allowed in the country, the Chinese exclusion laws, the precedent on the Chinese exclusion laws has not been overturned. It's
not even that.
Law.
Yeah, I heard you bring that up last night, and even more recently, we had a Hebrew ban on Jewish people all the way up until, I think, 1965 is when we got rid of. So even during the Holocaust, we weren't allowing refugees to come into the country who were Hebrew as well. So it was even more recent than that.
So if I were on the Supreme Court at the time those decisions were handed down, I might not agree with that, but I do have to accept it as the law, that admissions decisions are treated very differently. So maybe you could say, well, if Mohamoud Khalil wanted to come in and he voiced support for Palestine already, right? Mm-hmm. And they're like, we don't like that. Maybe you couldn't have you could have maybe a political issue with them banning him, but maybe you couldn't have a legal issue, right? If he's trying to get into the country as opposed to having a green card. You get me? But once he's in the country, you need to establish another basis beyond this admission, non-admission distinction by which to discriminate more against green card holders' First Amendment rights than citizens. And just saying, well, the rights are different is an excuse not to think, because that could justify you deporting a green card holder for saying he wants toast instead of dry bread, right? You could justify you deporting him for supporting Obama or versus Trump. Just saying that, well, they're different is an excuse not to think. You need to really ground out why it is that in this specific context, green card holders' First Amendment rights, which everyone seems to agree they have, should be different or are in fact different. And if your difference is like, well, green card holders should have less of a right to voice their political opinions in abstract terms than citizens, I just don't understand why. Like, why is that case? Other than they're just, guests, and so we can just fuck with them no matter what. That just makes no sense to me.
That would apply to refugees, asylum people who have already been applied for asylum, anybody who's already applied, they've already been approved to be in the country for whatever reason.
But I'm going to be honest with you, Tom. If it were me, I would apply it to illegal immigrants too, because I don't see any reason to distinguish that either.
Well, sure, but you don't really have to have a reason to deport illegal immigrants outside of the fact that they're illegal immigrants.
I agree with that, Tom. I totally agree with that they could just deport an illegal immigrant because they are inadmissible or because they crossed the border illegally, 100%. But what I mean is, if they said to an illegal immigrant, we're not deporting you because you immigrated illegally, we're deporting you because you support Trump, then I would have a problem with that, right?
Yeah, and I think we even ran into this recently with the 5 people who just got held up from the Alien Enemies Act. Some of them had already filled out CBP-1 apps and been approved for asylum to come into the country. They fly over here from El Salvador, and then once they got here, they had tattoos that looked like they could have something to do with Tren de Aragua, so they put them into detainment facilities and hold them there. If they just denied them for whatever reason whatsoever, just because they don't like their tattoos, it wouldn't matter. It's fine. Like it's totally different. But once they are applied, stuff, but once they're allowed to come in,
correct.
You would once they're given, say yes, you are approved, you're in the country. Now you would totally flip on that and say, well, now you can't say, well, I just don't like your tattoos, so you can't come in.
Yeah, 100%, Tom. I think that's the exact correct analysis. If Mohamoud Khalil, if they thought he did a crime and they charged him, I wouldn't be out here saying, they can't deport him on that basis. If they said he's deportable because he lied on his green card application, I would think it's a pretext. I would probably disagree on the merits, but I wouldn't be saying that it necessarily raises First Amendment issues, okay? With the Alien Enemies Act, it's a little different because it's not the First Amendment. It's more like due process type stuff, but it's the same kind of analysis. If they were trying to deport all these people because they were members of a gang, or because they committed some crime, or because they crossed the border illegally under the normal procedures, we wouldn't have a problem. But the reason why this is so bad is the administration is exceeding what it's allowed to do. And it has options available to get rid of these people, but it's choosing not to follow them. And the reason it's choosing not to follow them is for nefarious purposes. Because in actuality, what this is about is coercing private actors, coercing universities, coercing law firms, coercing individuals into not criticizing the regime. The same thing with Tren de Aragua people. It's about making people scared, and it's about shipping off people without having to give them hearings because they don't want to have to give people due process. They don't want to have to hear the claims. And so they're being evil, and they're trying to stomp out people's rights because they want to assert authoritarian control. There's no other explanation for why this is happening, and no one's able to give one other than, why are you defending gang members? Why are you defending Hamas? It's not about that. It's about defending ourselves, man.
Right.
But yeah, no, these are great questions, Tom. I got to bounce in a second, but if you have a last question, I can take it.
No, that was it. That's all I got. I also see you got somebody else in your waiting room, so I appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Later.
Peace out.